So, Far Cry 6. This is me playing it. I'm going to talk about it a bit. I'm not playing in real time. This is a video. And I'm doing an outpost here, which is what I care about in Far Cry. It's a game series that is often criticized for being too samey. It's kind of, each iteration is basically the same. And in particular, the story stuff is always kind of... it's gone from like egregious to lackluster. And in my circles anyway, that like the whole dialogue about this game is just always just about how limp the plot is, how sort of toothless it is, how cowardly it is, how it backs away from the tough subjects, how it fails to really engage. And I don't really care. Like, I think partly because to me this isn't a fall from grace. You know, this series started with Jack Carver fighting some trigens in a Polynesian island. And the story is fucking awful there. Far Cry 2 is obviously seen generally as the zenith, like creatively, of the series, and the story in that did nothing for me. It was completely sort of bankrupt to me. It was just incredibly sort of nihilistic and miserable, and just like failed on the mechanical level for me, where just like I need to know why I'm doing this, and I don't. I think what I'm doing is a terrible idea, and I'm blowing up, you know, medical supplies and farms and water towers, and I think I shouldn't, and that my buddies make no sense. Anyway, I have lots of things to say about why the story side of Far Cry 2 did not click for me. And Far Cry 3 is much, much worse, don't get me wrong. It's absolutely the worst in the series. But for me, this is not like the fact that 5 and New Dawn and now 6 are all don't really go anywhere with the story. I don't care. Like, that was never what I was here for. What I was here for was the outposts and the mix of, like, it's a stealth game that obviously they're always trying for a sort of a balance where you can play an action style and you can play a stealth style. But I don't care about the action one. And they're also doing that in the middle of an open world, and so that's a lot of what is exciting about it to me, versus, you know, the latest Wolfenstein games. You can play them stealthily for a lot of it, and they're good, and I enjoy it, but it's nothing special. I forget about it once I finish playing it. Whereas Far Cry games, I keep going back to them, and I'm always excited about the next one, because they have this particular format for stealth gameplay that I think is brilliant, and gives so much scope for not even creativity, it's just... By the way, I have no idea what this button does. If anyone knows, please... Oh, it raises a crate. Okay. Didn't notice that, didn't do anything with it. Yeah, it's not even that it gives you scope for creativity. It gives you a little bit of scope for that, but it's much more about just making your own decisions about how you're going to go about this. You approach it from any angle. At the start of this video, you might notice I'm coming towards the thing, there's an obvious place for me to go, and I just don't go there. I just go past it and just find another entrance, just because it'll probably be more interesting. And even if it's not, even if the entrance is just straight worse, it's mine. I chose that entrance. And that actually matters. That's the thing that, you know, changes your relationship with the game, like dramatically, actually. If I've had situations in games where like a scripted story mission forces me to do a certain activity, like chase someone through the streets in Assassin's Creed, and I'll hate it every miserable minute of it. And then later in the same game, emergently a thief steals my money and runs off down the street, and I chase him down the street, and I'm loving it because I decided to chase him, and I got into that just as I was wandering around. It wasn't sort of forced on me. And so just like expressiveness is often the word that's given to it, and even that feels too grand for what it is. It's really just choice. It's just you chose something, and the choice isn't necessarily interestingly different to the other one, but it's yours, and you knew you had a whole load of other options, and this option is different. It may not be meaningfully different, it may not be better, and it may not align to some playstyle you have in your head, although in the case of Far Cry it does. It's just that, you know, every one of the 6 different routes I could have taken would all have let me do a stealthy approach. And yeah, it just feels yours, and you can get invested in that. And then the other thing Far Cry has going for it as a stealth game is It just really successfully nails the feel of basically kind of a guerrilla kind of assault. You are completely outnumbered, completely outgunned, and you are going to have to sneak. And I don't notice this tripwire, by the way. I come back and defuse it later, but right then I didn't even see it. I came so close to tripping it. I'm sneaking past tripwires, I'm sabotaging alarm. By the way, I'm not just disabling that alarm, I'm making it so that if anyone tries to trigger it, they will be killed. I still haven't noticed the tripwire. I'm so close to it, I can't believe this. I'm looking for a way up to the next... Actually, I'm looking for a guy who I know I have tagged, and I can't find him anymore. Like, he should be near me. But that tripwire was right there the whole time. Yeah, there's also the grappling hook, which I love. I love grappling hooks in general. And this one is not a big swingy one where you're doing a lot of swinging around. There's a little bit of that, but it's most of the time you're just hauling yourself up some vertical surface. And that feels great, like throwing a rope up, a castle wall and then hauling yourself up. Feels so cool, and it's so of a piece with the fantasy of throwing a rock to distract someone and then stabbing them in the back, or carefully drawing a bow and waiting for just the right moment to loose the arrow so that it silently gets the guy so that they fall out of the vision range of all the other guards, so they're not going to find the body until you can get over to the body and pick it up and hide it. All of that feels great and paints this picture, or really creates a sort of motif of making you feel like you're a guerrilla and that you're extremely competent at this. That this is like you have a particular set of skills, and they are very well suited for getting through this very dangerous situation by being careful and methodical. And the one thing, in general, my feelings about Far Cry 6 are that it doesn't really move anything major forwards. It does two things, maybe three, that I like more than previous games, and most of the rest of it is kind of a step back. Like, I don't really like the equipment system. I don't really like that you can't level up anymore, and the progress, the way that resources feed into your meta progress and your base progression and everything, all of that's fine. It's just nothing like as good as New Dawn. New Dawn did that much better, and all the leveling of the weapons, which working towards unlocking stuff and crafting stuff, all of that stuff is done way better in New Dawn. New Dawn just did it in really a clean and clear, chunky, significant major upgrades. Here it's just a huge menu of weapons that are all kind of the same in terms of power. But yeah, one of the things it does do well is the feeling of being a guerrilla, and obviously this setting suits it, and there are just a few outposts that just really have that that fantasy. Like the Castle Wall one is a real example. There are just these coastal fortresses that you can climb up, and being careful is one of my favorite things in the right context, when the atmosphere is right, when it's in this context of stealth and guerrilla. I don't want to say guerrilla warfare, because plot-wise that's what you're doing, but gameplay-wise you're actually just a single operative. A lot of my favorite moments are when I just don't do something. Like, I'm all geared up to do it, and then I realize, no, I can't risk this, I've got to go. There will be a moment in a minute where you'll see someone's approaching and I realize I don't have any cover to go to, and I have to take drastic action. I'm probably overreacting, but I just love engaging with that, like taking it really seriously and really, I'll gladly abort a plan that isn't sound, just on the off chance it might backfire, and then go away and come at it from another angle. I have loads of patience for that, and that, I think, might be one of the reasons I click so much with these games and I love them and I keep coming back to them, is because I'm not a patient person at all. In the rest of my life I'm so impatient. It's really becoming a problem. I can't tolerate any delays and any frustrations and anything that's in my way, and yet when it comes to stealth, I'm just like, I'm at home and I can spend hours picking it apart gradually, piece by piece, methodically, carefully, because the stakes they feel high, even if they're not. I don't really lose anything if I die here, but it feels life and death, and I'm just so interested in the methodology and the fantasy of being in this life and death situation against crazy odds, and picking it apart piece by piece through good tactics and planning. And Here I am. I'm going to pause this actually. My whole strategy for this has been I've got to take out all of the alarms before I can let anyone find a body. And I am shooting this one, which is risky because when you shoot an alarm, people, if they see the shot, they'll be alerted by that. And I think even if they just find the broken alarm, they will go and sound an alarm if they can. But I've already hacked both of the other alarms, so they have no other alarm to go to. So the moment I shoot that, the base is safe. They can't sound an alarm. And I also want to go undetected, so it's not all-out combat yet. I still need to stay hidden. But now I don't care about them finding bodies because they can't sound an alarm. And that little bit of logic, a variant of that has been in everything since Far Cry 3. But I feel like this is the first time it actually matches up to how I want it to work. There's still a couple of tweaks I would make, but I remember in previous Far Cry games having to force myself to follow these kinds of rules. Like, I didn't have to, because actually they could find bodies and they wouldn't sound an alarm. Or they could find a broken alarm and they wouldn't sound an alarm. And so I had to make rules for myself of like, I'm not allowed to just shoot the alarms because that's too easy. Or I'm not allowed to let them find bodies. And this one, I think it's actually forcing me to, or pushing me to play in that style. And I like playing in that style, so that's great. It is hard to draw the line of like, how much of this game am I playing in my head and how much is actually in the rules of the game. But to some extent, it doesn't matter, right? So yeah, like the missions in this, the story missions, for a long time they were fine. And I actually was thinking, you know what, these haven't pissed me off as much as they normally do. And so this game is doing a better job than most other Far Cry games have of just making story missions that are just, they're there for variety. They're not really... They're never going to be better than the outposts. Always the best kind of story mission you can ever get is they just dump you in an outpost. And there are some like that. There's one where you're just in a prison. Oh, here's the bit where I realize I have no cover, except that one barrel. I guess I could have hidden behind that box there, but it just felt very, very exposed. So off I go. And at this point, I'm pretty sure this is the last enemy in the oil rig. As in, I was pretty sure at the time. But I'm still willing to spend all the time in the world to do it properly. I really want to find a good way of taking this person out. Yeah, the story missions are fine until they're not. There's just a shit ton of them, and there's different branches, which I appreciate. So when you're stuck on one, you can go into another. But now on all 3 branches, I've hit a mission where this is just bullshit. Actually, sorry, I finished one of the branches, but then there are still 3 available to me that are to advance the plot. And all 3 of them. One of them is just to go to a party. I can't complete the party. Like, I can't find enough carrots to make a vegetarian alternative for the barbecue. And if you need to abort out of it, you have to replay a whole long intersection. And there's just a load of bullshit like that. And so on every front of the story, I'm just like, well, I can never get any further in this because it's just, I'm on a bullshit mission and I don't have the patience to do it. Because that's one of the things I don't have patience for. Because it's not a stealth challenge. But yeah, the beating heart of it is still the outpost. The outpost is still there. The outpost is still great. There are a couple in here I really, really like. This one was great actually. They're not super distinctive, so I can't name the ones I really liked. But I just had ones where I was. By the way, why can't I mantle this? I don't know. I just had a bunch, and now I'm realizing I just saw the crime prompt on screen a minute ago, and right there you can do it. Yeah, I had some that were genuinely really difficult. I had to go away and replan. I failed like 3 or 4, maybe 5 times. And this one, I'm going to win. Yeah, I failed a load of times, had to rethink my strategy, come at it from a different angle, take a different tack. And by doing that, I eventually overcame it and won. And that's another thing that's very, very rare for me. I'm pretty salty when I fail. I don't like to fail. I don't play a lot of games at the bleeding edge of my ability. I like to play things that are within my ability, where I'm going to win like 80-90% of the time. And here was something where I failed 5 times before I won it, but I enjoyed the whole thing pretty much. There were a couple of moments of like, this feels too difficult, or I don't really know how to go past it. But then just re-strategized, came at it from another angle. That's over now. I guess I'm going to let it loop because it's better than having a still screen. I'm nearly done. Yeah, that felt good, and I have a very high opinion of any game that can be really difficult for me, but I still really enjoy it, and I respect the challenge, and I overcome it, and I feel great about that because that's so rare. I don't have that with like Twitch games, for example, like very difficult platformers and Dark Souls and all that stuff. I'm like, if it's really difficult, I'm not enjoying it, and I want to stop. Yeah, and then this is silly, but there are 2 things that like sort of other changes that this game makes that I think are positive. One big one is that enemies are not hostile to you unless you're in restricted areas. Like most of the world, you can just pass right by guards and they're fine with it. And so there's just less like having to stop and fight. You can still stop and fight if you want, and if you get close enough, they'll aggro, so there's still a bit of tension there. But that's a really good change. I like that, and I hope they stick with it. And then the other one is that when you're in the car listening to the radio, Danny will start to sing along to some of the songs. And even if you get out of the car, she carries on singing after the song has stopped. And I really like that. I think that's great. That's the progress Far Cry 6 has made.